So I am Kathy Stancer, and I work for a foundation called Lankelly Chase Foundation. And what I was going to do is a bit of a kind of whistle-stop tour of Lankelly's ambition and our approach, and including some of the mistakes we've made as a foundation in relation to thinking about racial justice and the role and the needs of organisations led by Black and minoritized people. And I was here for this morning, and I think some of what I'm going to say is a bit of a case study of what foundations shouldn't do, or the kind of mistakes that foundations often make, and certainly the mistakes that we've made. I will get onto that. And I guess that they are perhaps, I'm going to talk about some of our mistakes, some of our the work that we've been doing. And I was just saying that you will probably, and I will agree, think that some of these things are inevitable given the nature of foundations and their as institutions built on the accumulation of wealth. And there is an inevitability, I think, also that's built in because of the sort of people that by and large make up foundation trustees and senior employees. And Lankelly Chase itself has an unbroken record of white senior leadership. So it's, in a way, is a bit of a case study of what. So I was going to speak for about 20 minutes, and then I'm very happy to answer questions, but it would also be lovely to have a conversation about, I guess, how social justice and racial justice work should be resourced. And I guess it would be great if that was it could partly be about how foundations need to tweak their practice as it is now, but it would also be great if we could talk about, the ideal state of like how resources that are given for this work should be governed and how they should flow. So I'll talk about Lankelly Chase. I have a little presentation. I hope this is going to work. So I'll try and share my screen now. And I will put this onto a slideshow, which has also been slightly glitchy today. So Lankelly Chase, yeah. So I'll go on to the next slide in a moment. If you have any questions, please do shout. I'm really happy to stop and answer questions at any point. But I can't see everybody, so you'll need to give me a shout. So for about the last 10 years, we've been a foundation with a really active mission, and we see ourselves as active protagonists, really committed to using our amazing freedom and our resource, of course, to change the systems that perpetuate severe and multiple disadvantage, or at least that's the phrase we used for a long time. We've now slightly reframed it as tackling systems of injustice and oppression that result in the mental distress, violence and destitution experienced by people subject to marginalisation in the UK. And the word systems is really important to us. Lankelly Chase, as a team, the people involved, we largely come from practitioner backgrounds, from working in the voluntary sector. So we're not experts at all in systems thinking and practice, but we've taken a lot of inspiration from that discipline. And fundamentally, for us, it means that we try and work and behave in a way that is consistent with seeing social systems and social change as complex, interconnected and dynamic. So this slide kind of sums it up for us, that we see the world as a complex, interconnected, finite, ecological, social, psychological, economic system. We generally treat it as if it wasn't, as if it was divisible, separable, simple and infinite in terms of resources. And our persistent, intractable global problems arise directly from this mismatch. So that's kind of almost in a way our starting point. What it means in terms of the issues that we're dealing with is sort of like this. You've probably seen these kind of system maps illustrating the complexity, interconnectedness and dynamism of social issues before. This is a slightly random one I found on the internet. done by some people who are thinking about how to promote sustainable food systems in the Balkans. But you could probably do one of these for almost any social issue. And you could probably do another one for each of the kind of nodes or issues that are highlighted by this one. So things like lack of trust in institutions, blimey, that's a huge issue in itself. So in the face of this kind of complexity and the dynamism, interconnectedness of all these issues, we can feel really quite overwhelmed. I say we, I mean we at Lankelly Chase. It's overwhelming to try and think about how to intervene in this complexity. For us, in practice, this means several things. So it means that we see ourselves as part of the system, not separate from it. So as individuals and as an organisation, we try and model the change that we want to see in the world. This means that we do spend time on ourselves with things like reflective practice to kind of interrogate ourselves about the extent to which we're doing that. And we have focused on changing ourselves as an organisation in terms of how we make decisions and how we operate. So we try and behave as part of the system, recognising that endowed foundations in particular are part of the problem that we're trying to change. We take a learning approach, so we don't have fixed plans, we don't have an outcomes-based approach, and we don't expect the organisations we fund to have an outcomes-based approach either. We learn as we go along, because this complexity and dynamism in systems means things are changing all the time, and any action that we take is bound to have unintended consequences. And unless we're learning about what those are and then changing course, I think, as Yvonne mentioned this morning about sort of learning and adapting as you go, you can't really act meaningfully in a complex situation. You think everything exists in relationship, nothing is by itself, and we try and focus on underlying conditions, so mindsets and behaviours, mental models, because we think if these things change, then everything changes. And we have a set of what we call system behaviours, which are up on our website. I've put the link on there, which are our best guess at the kind of those at healthy conditions that would give rise to healthy systems. So, and yes, and this is just an illustration of I have a phone call, that's not helpful. Excuse me. This is just an illustration of that point about mental models. And I just see there's a question in the chat, I think, which I'm struggling to see. So if somebody has a question, to perhaps just interrupt me, because I'm struggling to kind of to see the chat. Apologies. So yeah, mental models, they're at the bottom, the kind of foundation of everything else. So that's where we try and put our resources. So you might ask what it is that we actually do. So we have 3 strands of work: how, where, and who, which is in development, and how is about trying to disrupt the patterns of business as usual. So the way funding is done, the way governance is done, the way evaluation is done, the way investments are done by foundations. So we have kind of experimental work going on all those things. We have a place-based program, which is about supporting networks of people in local areas to come together to work out collaboratively how to shift local systems. So we fund a lot of time and space for people to take part in that kind of work, skills development, backbone, coordination capacity, and leadership among traditionally marginalised groups of people, including people with lived experience. And who? We want to fund the capacity of change makers and fellow travellers to do this kind of work, recognising that in many cases this has been under-resourced. And obviously this connects very strongly with the theme of this conference. And there we are really wanting to disrupt patterns of where and how resources and power are held. And that is a programme of work that we're developing. So this is a conversation about racial justice and about the role of organisations led by Black and minoritised people. And so I'm going to talk a little bit about what racial justice means to us as a foundation, and as I said at the beginning, about our mistakes. We have made a lot of mistakes. So we've always seen racial justice as important. And in fact, we had an equalities and rights programme for a while that I led. When I look back at some of the way we frame that, it seems very simplistic, but we did recognise the stark disproportionality at key moments in key systems like school exclusion, arrest, imprisonment, and detention under the mental health, significant in driving extreme marginalisation. And we did name public organisation as institutional racism. So we took it seriously and we made efforts, and they were efforts that felt right to us at the time. But I guess it's about bearing in mind who us was. Us was a white-led organisation with a huge amount of privilege built into it. So these were some of the kind of well-meaning efforts that we made. So we had a programmatic commitment to ethnic inequality and mental health. It's been a long-standing issue that the foundation's been involved in. We've made some big investments. Our biggest ever grant was to establish the Synergy Collaborative Centre on Ethnic Inequality and Mental Health, and founded the Funders for Race Equality Alliance. So we did what we thought was right, but we realised, and we've realised increasingly, that this doesn't amount to a racial justice approach. And I think we look back and feel that we were naive, that we were simplistic, that we blundered, that we were insufficiently aware of the dynamics that we were part of, and that we were sometimes, as individuals and as an organisation, performative in what we were doing. And you've probably already spotted some of the reasons for this, why our wrong turns and our mistakes were already baked into our way of thinking and being as a foundation. And so I'm going to talk about our mistakes. And this a bit, I think, looks like a kind of case study or a roll call of what leads organisations, perhaps foundations in particular, to not address racism and to call this by its proper name. This is institutional racism, and it's not deliberate or calculated, but it's the result of ingrained ways of thinking and the result of who has power and authority. So this is some of what we did. We didn't check our starting assumptions. So we used a definition of severe and multiple disadvantage, which was our key issue, which focused on services and on commissioning, and it put us in territory that was familiar to the white team at Lankelly Chase, who had worked in the established kind of white-led voluntary sector. And this led to data inequity, because we then commissioned academic research, which provided the foundation for the first few years of our work on systems change. And we decided on the terms of that ourselves. We did it in line with that definition. We drew data from services. So again, it excluded the experience of minoritised people. And the research, unsurprisingly, delivered a picture, statistical picture, that showed that the issues we were working on, severe and multiple disadvantage, as an overwhelmingly white and male issue, quite, I don't know, it's quite a thing to arrive at that as a conclusion. We did recognise that as problematic, and we did do work to look at other experiences, and most notably and deeply around gender, but it was always corrective and it was always secondary. So our main foundational published research made it difficult for us, and I'm sure for others who used it, to make the case that racial and gender justice was central to our work. So this is about the perils of past dependency, and once you get down a path determined by your early decisions, it's difficult to reverse out of that. Do the work on ourselves. We didn't engage in deep work as individuals or as a team to consider how our assumptions and experience might play in dynamics. white leadership and didn't think deeply about the experience of colleagues of colour, what it might take for them to feel able to fully express their insights, and our organisation was really restricted as a result. We saw, because of those early things about data and our definitions, we saw racial justice as a slightly separate issue from our main agenda. So we knew inequity was important, but as I've said, we didn't fully integrate it into our analysis. And as such, it remained slightly as a side issue. So anytime we wanted to do work like the big grant to Synergy, we had to kind of argue for it as almost as a special case. We were fundamentally extractive. We understood, but we didn't think it was our role to play a part in addressing the historic underfunding of organisations led by Black and minoritised people. We thought this was someone else's job, and that we could fund systems change work without supporting the roots of that in the sector. So inevitably, this has reinforced the exclusivity of systems change as an issue and as a kind of discipline, and meant that the networks that we're part of are largely of white-led organisations. And we came across as overly intellectual and confusing, and this is still the case, I think. And we demanded that people take time to understand us and our thinking and our perspective, but we weren't always prepared to do that work ourselves. So in other words, we have lacked a holistic approach to racial justice across personal, institutional and societal levels. And as such, we've contributed to the problems that we've been discussing at this conference. So what we're doing now, and it's what we've been pushed to do, it's things that feel right. And there are such strong signals from the field. Kelly Chase has a £140 million endowment, of which we spend kind of the interest each year. But we've had really strong challenge, particularly from partners from the kind of lived experience leadership space. And their point has been that people who that resource was designed to benefit, was given to benefit, should have control over it and actually directly benefit from it, rather than the benefit being mediated by an industry of middle-class professionals. So it's a very strong challenge coming to us from that. There's obviously the activism of colleagues in the foundation field and beyond, which has really raised up the question of, well, who gets to be part of Lankelly Chase? Who gets hierarchical power within our organisation? There's been a really strong push from Black and minoritised colleagues within the team, and things like this, recognition of the implications of historic underfunding and our own extractivism. So we can say that we're doing much more than we were before, and we're doing it better. And I do feel some pride in being able to say that. But I can also hear the voice of colleagues. You know, why has this taken so long? What is stopping us from going further? How committed are we really? Because those mistakes that I outlined seem pretty obvious in retrospect. So anyway, we have moved, and some of the things we're doing have the potential to take us a long way, I think. It's not enough, and it doesn't cancel out those things I talked about earlier. And I'm not trying to justify ourselves, but just to say this is part of the process of us learning to do better. So some of the things we are now doing are distribution of funds, other institutions that are better able to distribute it than us, rather than just grant making, and that feels better. We've done big changes with our governance, so there's been a significant increase in the presence of people with lived experience and racial justice expertise on our board, to the extent that it's almost an entirely new board, and they are inquiring into what governance should look like for a foundation like ours. We've done work on strategy and on communications. Sorry, to go on to the next slide, so that it's clear where we stand on racial justice. It's unambiguous and central. We've done quite a lot of internal work within the team, so as individuals and together. So we've had a study group of one and discussing it. We've got an internal team looking at racial justice. We've worked with external coaches, and we're looking at pay and structure, and we're open to becoming a really different kind of organisation with different leadership. And perhaps I think as a result of all this, we're following through on earlier commitments. So those ones I mentioned about mental health, for example, with greater self-awareness and more sensitivity. And I think that we're doing the work better as a result. We're also working to broaden our networks, so making really proactive efforts to resource networks and organisations led by Black and minoritised people. And expertise and commitment of one member of our team, but we've also identified opportunities in our places to really broaden those networks, especially in Greater Manchester. But there's still an issue about us inviting people into our work rather than getting behind networks of people that are already out there. We're establishing the WHO strand of work, which is about resourcing under-resourced leadership. And we've done a lot of work on our investments, about disinvesting around climate change and fossil fuel issues, but also now working on racial. And we have a racial justice accountability plan that we will be publishing soon.
Kathy, can I ask you a question, please?
Yeah, of course.
Hello,
Yes.
hello.
Yeah.
I'm Sonia from Wiltshire
Hello.
Racial Equality Council.
Hello.
And I see your changes, and you've admitted your mistakes. How are you going to qualify and quantify your mistakes? How are you going to monitor them? Did you hear me?
Yes. How are we going to monitor and quantify? Did you say?
Yes,
sorry.
That's right. Yes.
Yeah. So we're publishing our racial justice accountability plan, and that has some kind of quantitative targets in it around the amount of our funding that we're giving. But some of the racial justice accountability plan is it's stronger than aspirational, but it's still at the stage where we're exploring things like the investments. So I don't think we're yet at a point where we could say that, you know, this percentage of our investments will be redistributed through other institutions or will be invested. So some of it is at the stage of we are working out how to do that rather than making quantifiable commitments.
I just want to say thank you for being transparent and open.
Oh, thank you for saying that. I mean, it just, we've been having a lot of conversations about this. It feels important to us. So I'll just finish up because I'm nearly finished. So yeah, so those are some of the things we've done. There are some big questions that all that work has opened up for us, which are really exciting questions, I think, about what are we really up for as a foundation, about the nature of the organisation, about being a hierarchical organisation, about the leadership, about the endowment. You know, what is it for? Is it right that it's invested in the stock market, even in, you know, an ethical investment? What should it be doing in the world? What can we let go of in terms of distribution of our endowment? And these things feel exciting. if difficult, because it's going to mean loss for some of us personally. So we definitely stand by our view of social change as complex, interconnected and dynamic. I think it absolutely describes the reality and the human experience of trying to promote social change and make the world a better place. And this thinking, married with these ideas about justice and power, has the potential to be really transformational. We do believe, but we recognise that we need to be a different kind of organisation, and we're starting to fundamentally get to that. But as I've said, about questions about who controls the resource, how exploitation can be fundamentally removed from our chain of activity, what the endowment is for, it's all on the table. But I do think perhaps if we'd been a different kind of organisation with different leadership, we'd have got here much more quickly. And that's the reality of it. And it goes back to what Martha was saying earlier. I think that it's not just morally right, it's that we cannot succeed in our mission without the kind of leadership and expertise that comes from Black and minoritized people. And so it's vital that we do this work properly, otherwise we are going to fail in our ambition. So I think I will stop there and and I'll switch my screen share off so that we can have a conversation. As I said, I'm very happy to answer any questions. I'd also be really interested in any views about, what the future of philanthropy should look like, and how these kind of big resources like ours, which are remarkably free, we have very few strings attached, how they can be governed and how they can flow. So yeah, any questions or any thoughts, gratefully received. I'm sorry, my internet was quite rubbish.
How can we partner up or link up with you?
We're always open for conversations. We're always happy to talk to people. We do have that set of, the who, how, and where way of structuring our work. And again, this goes back to some of the problems with us, probably, but because we see ourselves as quite an active foundation in the world, we have our own strategy and we're pushing a strategy. So for us, it depends on whether there is alignment between your strategy and our strategy, but we're always up for conversations.
Thank you. I'll do that next. I'll contact early next week. Thank you.
Yeah, that's fine. Yes. Mm-hmm. Any other questions or any thoughts on those? On the big question of, an endowment like Lankelly Chase's is, as I've said, remarkably free. We have very few strings attached. We have no family involved. Like some foundations still have family members involved. We have no corporate involvement. Limitations are that it has to be charitable purposes. So it's an amazing position to be in. And it'd be there's and there are other foundations like ours. So I guess the question that's really interesting to me is, in an ideal world, what would that look like?
Hey, Kathy.
How would that be governed?
Yeah, thanks for sharing that. Actually, I'm a big fan of your work. I'm from Bedfordshire and Luton Community Foundation, so we're on a much smaller scale, but big fan of the direction you've taken in terms of transparency, especially with your investments. And like I said in the chat, one of the only foundations that actually publishes their entire portfolio and holdings. So it's good, and I think it certainly it pushes the barrier and the bar that people have set previously. And I think going forward, Lankelly, it'd be interesting to see what role you could play in terms of leading in, as an example for some of the other foundations that perhaps haven't even considered that or haven't even started looking at their endowment yet.
We're losing you. I missed the middle bit of what you said. I'm sorry. So was there a question? Because
Yeah. So it was
you
around
broke up
how
a little bit. Sorry.
it was around how Lankeley could play a role in terms of that now that you've set the bar quite high for yourself, how could you support some of the other foundations to move forward in a similar way, considering that many haven't even started considering what their endowments are doing?
Yeah. Yes, so we have a colleague, Dominic, who's our investment director, and he is, a large part of his role is trying to engage partly with the fund managers who we're working with, but also with other foundations. And so is writing and blogging about the experience that we've been through, which has taken ages. It's another thing. It's taken years and years and years of some would say faffing, to get to the point where we feel relatively confident in what we're doing about our investments. And again, I think with different leadership, with different people involved who with more sense of urgency, we would have got here much quicker. But anyway, engage other foundations, talk with other foundations, and just write about our own experiences and share our own experiences without being kind of holier than thou, because it's not been straightforward and it has taken us a very long time.
Very forward thinking.
Sort of. Yeah.
No, I think you are. You're a lot better than a lot out of there. You're transparent. You do what you say on the tin. You don't hide behind acronyms. So that for us is an open door. Thank you.
So, and any other questions? Anything people want to share? Doesn't have to be directed at me. So it looks like an interesting group of people here. Any thoughts about?
Yeah. How do we go about going back grant making? How do we go? I know that many on here would be asking the same question, so I'm going to be the brave one. If we were to put in a funding bid, how do we go about that? What would be your recommendations? Where do we start?
It just starts with a conversation.
Okay.
I guess the starting point would be to drop me an email and to begin with a conversation.
Okay.
So I'm happy to be a kind of contact point for Lankelly Chase, but I might not be the right person to continue that conversation.
Okay, well, I know that I personally will make contact with you by email, just to say, if you don't knock, the doors won't be open. So I'll give it a try. Thank you.
So again, really keen to hear anybody's perspectives on anything I've said or anything you want to say to each other. I mean, again, it doesn't have to be directed at me.
Kathy, sorry, it's Denise Stevenson here. We were on a small group earlier today,
Hello.
and I just wondered whether or not, in order to generate the conversation, I suppose we should touch upon some of the things that we discussed in that meeting. I don't know if you wanted to. So I was saying to Kathy that her approach was extremely refreshing. And I mean, I don't know much about the funding world at all, even though my charity has been going for 10 years. But we are entering into that space. We're not surprised by, at least I'm not surprised by some of the things that I've heard during the sessions the last 2 days. But in terms of what Kathy and Lankelly Chase are doing, one of the, I made several sort of observations to Kathy when we were in a small group session earlier, about the fact that her organisation seemed to pride themselves on the fact that they had a way of thinking, they had a way of evaluating the areas that they were trying to help, but that came very much from a white lens. And I think you've recognised this, haven't you, Kathy? And that the fact that it was a white-led organisation, and they were coming to the fore with some views, but they didn't have the input of sort of, you know, people of colour, for example, to help them understand what the issues were like on a grassroots level. So one of the things that I suggested to Kathy was that perhaps in order to hold themselves accountable, that they should perhaps partner with a charity, a non-profit organisation who are BAME-led. I hate the word BAME, but are led by people of colour, black and brown people, and who are knowledgeable about the areas, the problems that they're trying to tackle, and can sort of co-partner with them to set strategies, targets, etc., so that they can look back on it in 6 months or a year and say, right, okay, we've achieved these, and actually we're serving the communities or the areas, and we're addressing the issues that we want to serve. So I don't know if there's anybody on the call which has gone down that route or that experience, or even Kathy, your feedback on those ideas.
Yeah, I think that sounds incredibly helpful. Obviously, I mentioned before about kind of extractivism, so we would want to make sure that was a relationship of equality and you know, that we were ethical in terms of how we resourced that. But I think it sounds like a really good idea, and maybe sort of slightly building it out in my mind, thinking about yeah, perhaps more than or some sort of panel, I don't know, but perhaps more than one perspective as well. But yeah, I think that sounds like a really good idea.
Yeah,
and
I think yeah.
Yeah.
Sorry, go on, Kathy. Sorry.
Give us some assurance that we're not being performative, you know, that there is substance to what we're doing.
Yeah.
So yeah, I think that's.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know what your board makeup is. I mean, it's interesting because I was on a call yesterday for Sport England, and they were talking about race and racism in sport, and they've done a recent report. And this is me wearing another hat, but one of the things that came out consistently was that in order to challenge the structural forms of racism and deconstruct it, you need people of colour on boards in leadership positions. They need to be around the table, because otherwise you are going round and round and round in circles, and these issues never get addressed. And organisations sit there and think, oh yeah, we're doing a great job, we're serving the communities that we're seeking to serve, but then you find that you're not. So
absolutely. So we've been through quite a process around our governance. And there's a blog up on our website if anybody's interested, by our chief exec, Julian. So our sort of old board almost decided to resign en masse, and make way for a new board of people with experience of the kind of issues that we're wanting to address, and who are leaders in the kind of racial justice space themselves. So there is an overlap between those two groups going on at the moment, where the new group of trustees have come in, and the old trustees are over time will step out of the way. But yes, we've seen that as absolutely fundamental. There's pressure now from our board, our new board and the old board, to think about the leadership of the foundation in terms of the staff team, the executive. So not just the governance, but you know, who who is in the leadership team at Langley Chase and how people are rewarded and what kind of organisation we want to be. So yeah, I can only agree that those things are really important.
It's brilliant that you've actually identified the issue, and instead of continually talking about it and searching for evidence, you're doing something about it, and that's to be commended.
Thank you. We are doing things, and I'm proud of those things, but I think that there are other colleagues who could be here today who would, there's still a, you know, a major critique of us as an organisation. And I think I just saw that point in the chat about the dynamics of decision making. I think there's a spectrum within Lankelly Chase from places where we're starting to get it much more right and better. So I talked before about where we're devolving decision making into local places, and so establishing groups of local people in the places where we're working, and they now have devolved decision making powers over our funds. So not just in, yes, I was just saying that we've got bits of it we're doing quite well, other bits we are still muddly, confusing, and in that muddle it's very easy for the power dynamic to be wrong, to be unhelpful. Even if we are, you know, friendly as individuals, I think people feel like they don't quite know what we want or how to navigate the relationship with us. Yeah. So we just have a few minutes left, I think. Just a couple of minutes. Anybody have any last thoughts or questions?
I found your talk very informative and very refreshing.
Thank you very much.
Well, no,
really appreciate
it's given us hope. I know with my organisation, Wiltshire Racial Equality Council, you've given us hope that there's an organisation such as your foundation who are willing, to engage and to listen to us. And the fact that you've taken diversity so seriously, you know, and your board has changed. Brilliant.
Great. Thank you. Thank you very much. And thanks everybody. I think we'll I think we've got a 10-minute break now before the last session. Great. Thanks very much, everybody.
Thank you, Kathy. That was really good.
No problem.
Thanks, Kathy. Thank you. Fantastic. Thank you.